Welcome back, friends. This week's video, we're going to be trying something that I have never ever done before. Now, as a YouTuber, I read a lot more than what ends up being in a video. And then sometimes I have a video concept that I start filming and recording, but then that concept just doesn't work, or I don't have the time to commit to that video, or it isn't timely or trending anymore, so I scrap it. But I figured, why not put that footage to use? And so I'm doing my first ever canceled video, if that makes sense. I do not want to claim the canceled videos concept. This is something that I saw Kayla from booksandlala do. And so I'm taking a page out of her book. Total credit to her. Love her channel, love Kayla. In fact, I highly suggest that you guys, if you're watching, go take a look at Kayla's channel, but she needs no promotion from me. She's a booktube queen in her own right. So for this particular video, the canceled video, I guess you could say, is my Halloween video that I had intended to put out last year. Now, I had read A Diary of Blood and Midnight is the Darkest Hour, and I intended on doing a Halloween video because those are kind of like spooky, ooky, thriller, horror books. But time just got away from me, and I had gotten super sick at that time. Like literally while I was filming this video, I had gotten so sick that the week after Halloween had ended, I went to the hospital, and I was in the hospital for like 3 days. So this video just never made it out there. And then also this year, I started working on a Halloween video, and the first book that I read for that is The Wicked and the Willing. And this is a book that was Riley and Sarah without an H's Patreon book club of the month. And I had intended on doing a Halloween video this year because I didn't do one last year, but this thing happened where I had to move last minute, and my reading has really taken a nosedive. I have not been reading that much. So instead of just scrapping this all together, I decided to put that footage together and give you this canceled Halloween video. Now, before we get started, I do want to say that this footage is almost a year old, so I look really different. My hair looks really different. My face looks really different, especially for the footage that happened last year. I was like living in an apartment with the ex-boyfriend. We don't want to talk about the ex-boyfriend. He is trash. So the scenery will look a bit different. So I just wanted to give you guys the heads up before we get started. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to get started with reading A Diary of Blood. So let's get started with that book now. Good morning, everyone. And I say that because I have literally just woken up. Oh, May, come on. Don't start making noise just as I start to record. Anyway, I wanted to give you an update on A Diary of Blood. I did listen to it yesterday on my way to and from work. This book is actually 5 hours long. I don't know why I thought it was 4 hours long for the audiobook. And so then I finished it last night while I was just like reading in bed. I think that this book was perfectly classified as a gothic horror. So this book opens up with, we assume it's Dracula. She never actually says Dracula in the audiobook, but it's being told from Costanza's perspective. And I mean literally every single time the narrator of the audiobook had to say Costanza, she said it like Costanza. So we open up with Costanza. She's in some kind of like war or battlefield, and I don't remember what the time period for this was, but it was like ye old times ago. Maybe it was like in the 15 or 1700s. I don't remember, but she's on some kind of battlefield, and Dracula, and he decides to save her because she's dying, and he turns her into a vampire, and he chooses her to be his wife. So we kind of follow along with them falling in love, because obviously as vampires they're immortal, so sometime it's gonna pass. And then we learn that Dracula's kind of abusive. He then decides to take a second wife, and I think her name is Magdalena. The way that these names are already falling out of my brain, and I just finished it last night. So he decides to take a second wife, Magdalena, and Costanza wasn't sure about another person joining into the relationship. I mean, this book, if I had to describe it as anything, it's queer polygamy vampires. So they take on another wife, and they're live, laugh, loving along. Costanza actually likes Magdalena, falls in love with her. So like in Dracula's mind is like, this is perfect. But we find out that Dracula's kind of like abusive. He kind of just locks them up. He doesn't let them like go anywhere. He's the one in charge. He tells them if they're moving someplace else, or if they're staying there, or when they're allowed to come and when they're allowed to leave. And for a while this arrangement has worked, but then they take on a third person in their marriage, their polygamy marriage, and this person is Alexei. Costanza finds out that Dracula has had multiple like connections with other people, or mailing other people along the way to turn them into vampires and stuff. So now she's wondering like, what happened to the people in the past that he has formed a relationship with or called his wife or husband that's no longer in their polygamous circle, and she gets concerned that he is going to tire of them and kill them. Dracula is also on a mission to learn more about vampires, since he is one. Like, what kills them, how do they turn, how do they get their powers, the speed. I would classify Dracula as more as a person that's like hunting for education to learn more about what it is that makes vampires vampires. But like I said before, Costanza's concerned that Dracula is going to tire them and bore them. But I think overall, I feel like this book was like just really short, but it was done in such a great style. You're reading the book from Costanza's perspective. It just feels like she's having a conversation with you, and she's telling you the story of like how she became to be a vampire, how she became to be one of Dracula's wives. May, can you please stop chasing your tail? And I will say all the sex scenes, whether it was just Dracula Costanza or it was all three of them together or two of them or four of them together, it was all very hot. I enjoy this book because of the writing style that it's being told in. Like I said, Costanza's telling us like she's having a conversation with us and just kind of like going through her history and her time that she spent with Dracula. We're also getting a lot of her motivations. I'm gonna pick you up if you don't stop doing that. And I probably look really ugly in this clip because I have not washed my face or brushed my teeth. I literally just woke up and decided I'm gonna record. And what we're gonna do now is that I'm gonna start Midnight is the Darkest Hour and start listening to that on audio while I work. The audiobook for that is 12 hours long, so I'm gonna start it today. I don't think I'm gonna finish it today, even if I bump the speed up. I might finish it tomorrow. That's all I have to say. I'm gonna get started reading on Midnight is the Darkest Hour.
1 day later.
Okay, update time. I think about 50% through with Midnight is the Darkest Hour, and I have to say it started out strong and I was very interested. I mean, Ashley Winstead is my girly. Like, In My Dreams I Hold a Knife is one of my favorite books that I've read this year, but for some reason this one is not capturing, you know, all the energy of a thriller. But let me just back up for a second because I'll tell you what this book is about. So in this book it's set in Louisiana, down south, like deep religious south. Right in the very beginning of the book there was a murder and we know who committed the murder. And so then we have Ruth, who is the town pastor's daughter, and then we have Everett, who is like an outcast in this town. He's not really like religious, he's just kind of like there. But the two of them become friends, and the story is being told in multiple timelines. So we have the timeline of back when Ruth was like a teenager, and then we have the timeline of Ruth now that she's like in her 20s. Religion is playing a larger role in this book than I want it to be. Like, Ruth is just very self-righteous and she's all about Jesus and she's all about God. And this is the kind of town of like, if you don't show up to church, they think you're a sinner. If you have sex before marriage, you're a sinner. If you talk bad about Jesus or you use his name in vain, you're a sinner. Like, I think that this book is just kind of getting me in the fact that I don't like how religious heavy it is, because I grew up very, very Christian and I kind of just reject that identity and that world of, you know, Christ and the church. So I just didn't know that this book was going to be so heavy on that. So it's kind of dragging me down. But a book is, I feel like it's less so a thriller than it is a romance, which is fine. I just feel like, I don't know why this book is giving me YA. I mean, I kind of do, because Ruth is a big fan of Twilight, and don't get me wrong, like, I liked Twilight back in the day too. I could see how Ruth is like attracted to that, or is gravitating towards that in her small, like, closed-minded religious town. It's just, I didn't know that Twilight was going to play such like a heavy role in this book. I don't know. I'm 50% of the way through and it's kind of just like lost my interest, which is like not what I wanted this book to do. I wanted to be live, laugh, loving. I wanted to like this book so much because, like I said, Ashley Winstead wrote one of my favorite books this year. So I am just gonna keep reading and hope that it gets better. But right now it's probably sitting at a 3 stars for me, and that's kind of unfortunate. But we'll keep reading and we will see how that goes. I will say before I head away is that I have seen some mixed reviews online about the narrator's like accent, that she's choosing to use like that southern kind of accent. I mean, I will say the accent is a choice. it is definitely a choice. But because I've been listening to it at like 1.75 speed, it's not really bothering me. So do the best that you can do for you. Either read it physically with your eyeballs or listen to the audio. That's what I have to say about this book so far. I'm just gonna keep reading and see where we kind of go from there.
One eternity later.
It's been quite some time since I finished reading Midnight is the Darkest Hour, and what I want to say about this book. It started off strong, but it ended really badly. I enjoyed probably like the first third of this book, and let me just refresh your memory about what this book is. So this book is set in the Deep South in a very religious community. They kind of have this myth going on in this town about something called the Low Man, who is like this vampiric or dark being that causes like trouble or, you know, is out for revenge. I will say from here on out, I will be spoiling this book because if you can't tell by now, I did not like this book. So Ruth and Everett committed a murder at the very beginning of the book, where Ruth is like out on a date with this one guy who ends up kind of getting a little bit too touchy-feely with her, borderline on SA, and Everett, you know, was there. He like kind of oversees what's going on, and he attacks this man, and they both end up attacking this man, and then he dies. So then we're kind of flash forwarding to the future where the cops have found a body or the remains of someone in the swamp that Everett and Ruth committed that murder at. And so they're both like, oh my God, we're gonna get caught. And so the book just kind of takes on from there. I didn't really like the religiousness in this book. I came from a very like religious Christianity upbringing, and I have since left the church behind, and having to like reread about how this town was just like, Jesus this, you're a sinner, you have to follow the Bible, was just a little bit too much for me. Then from there, we kind of realized that there's just like this mystery going on in this town about some drug dealers, and there was this issue with Ruth's dad, who, just to completely give the spoiler of it all, like Ruth's dad is kind of this like huge figure in the town because he is the pastor. Turns out Ruth's dad was on the DL, like a part of this drug ring, and he is a part of removing people, you know, cutting their heads off of people in the town that he doesn't like, or people that he needs to get money from, blah, blah, blah. One of the things that happened in this book was that Ruth was just very passive, and Ruth and Everett kind of like, from the beginning, we could tell that they had feelings for each other. And the one thing that Ruth does in order to cope with how restrictive her religious upbringing is that she finds Twilight in her public library. And I think, and I could be completely making this up, but her public library is very controlled to the point that they just don't allow books that they think are, you know, satanic or whatever. But they kept Twilight because it kind of looks like, if you look at the cover of Twilight, and I'll illustrate that in this video, it kind of looks like Adam and Eve with the forbidden fruit. So maybe that's why the library were like, let's keep this book here, because obviously it's, you know, Christianity, or it's talking about Christianity. Ruth develops this love for Twilight, and she like completely builds her whole entire world being around Twilight. And then there was this one scene at the end where Ruth and Everett get into it a little bit, and I'm just gonna play this for you because it's so insane that Ashley Winstead would put this out there and write this and just put it out in the universe, that I was just like, I audibly gasped out loud. I was like, this cannot be something that she decides to write, and I'll play it.
Ever, I already know. He looks at me cautiously. You do? There were so many clues once I knew to look. I steel myself, walking toward him slowly, praying he doesn't retreat. If I'm honest, I've always known there was something different about you. He doesn't move, doesn't even blink as I inch closer, telling him what I finally figured out. You're too beautiful. Too pale and too cold. I can never feel your pulse. You run too fast. You've barely aged in 6 years. You sucked the copperhead venom from my leg. That night with the deer, all the blood in your mouth, the way you spend all your time outside in the swamp. It's been staring me in the face all these years. You're not human. Ever's voice comes out strangled. What am I then? I take a deep breath. All or nothing. You're the Low Man. His brow furrows. That's what you think? I stop my progress. Aren't you? All these years, have you been waiting for me to tell you I'm some sort of supernatural creature? His laugh is harsh and clipped. Have you been hoping I'm fucking Edward Cullen? I can't speak. He studies me. Then his voice softens. My God, you have.
So basically what is happening here is that Ruth just has this intense, deep love for Twilight that she kind of like puts it on Everett. So her entire like growing up, she's thinking that he's a vampire. It's literally that scene from Twilight where Bella calls Edward a vampire for the first time. Editing, Lexi, go ahead and insert that scene.
You're impossibly fast and strong. Your skin is pale white and ice cold. I know what you are.
Say it. Out loud. Say it.
Vampire.
So yeah, it's literally that scene from Twilight where, you know, Bella calls Edward a vampire and he's like, say it out loud. And she's like, vampire. Except in the book, it's far cringier and he's not a vampire. Like Everett, after that clip that I just played for you, he's literally like, you think I'm Edward fucking Cullen? I'm not. I'm just an abused child who had a rough upbringing. From there, they have some sexy time and they kind of just like make up and they're like, you know what, we should just get out of this town. This town is too small-minded for us. The town has kind of realized and put two and two together. I mean, credit to them for not being idiots in this small town. They put two and two together and figure out that Everett and Ruth have been doing the killings in the town, mostly Everett. And so Everett and Ruth are like, we gotta get out of here. Like we gotta run from the law. And so they get in their car and they're like speeding off and Everett's like, the police sirens in the background, it's not for us, that can't be for us. But no, the police are hot on their trails and then they're like, let's drive, let's make it over this bridge. And then once we make it over this bridge, like we're getting away, we can do it. And right as like they start raising the bridge, Everett is like, we can make it, we can drive. It's literally they Thelma and Louise themselves. Except in Thelma and Louise, that movie just cuts off and then you don't know if they made it past like that ravine or that canyon or whatever. And in the book, it literally just cuts off. It's kind of implied that they don't make it, but literally the audio just cuts off and it's like, this has been a production of blah, 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 blah. And I was like, did my audiobook skip something? Like, did we miss something? What happened here? I just don't think that she should have left that ending up for interpretation. She should have finished that out, quite frankly. And I just didn't like the book. It was too heavy on the Twilight references. It was more of a love story than a thriller. I mean, from the thriller aspects of it, you kind of put two and two together pretty easily. So yeah, this was not a good book. I think I'm rating it 2 stars. But I'm gonna stop talking about this book right now because it's literally just getting me angry. But I like Dowry of Blood. Midnight is the Darkest Hour, just a complete fail, 2 stars. A Dowry of Blood is 5-star book. And I did end up going and purchasing the Dowry of Blood. I got it off of Mercari because I wanted the bookish box edition of it with the sprayed edges and that cover. So let's just open up this mail together. Good thing I brought scissors. Okay, it's coming open, it's coming open. No, it's not, no, it's not. So this is really nice and it does say the bookish box. So I don't know if this book originally, when it was shipped by this box subscription service, if they originally came in this like green felt kind of thing, because like I said, I did get this off of Mercari. And then it came with this reading list that I might honestly just use as a bookmark because I'm reading a different book right now that I'm literally using a receipt as a bookmark. And then here is the book that is so beautiful and it has some nice beautiful sprayed edges also along the top. And let me just see the naked hardcover. Oh, the naked hardcover of this book is absolutely gorgeous. Gorgeous. So yeah, I'm really glad that I have this book.
1 year later.
Okay, besties, I have finished The Wicked and the Willing, and I have to say, I don't like this book. I give it 1 star. I don't think I've touched on what The Wicked and the Willing is, but this is a female vampire horror novel set in 1920s Singapore. That is the way that this book was sold to me. female vampires in Singapore. All I had to hear was those words and I was like, yes, besties, I am in. I'm gonna read this book. So we're following Jean Chu, and she is financially not doing great, and she gets a job working for this woman called Ebadine, who we also refer to as Verity within the book. Verity is a vampire, and I believe that Jean Chu was brought into this household to work for Verity because Verity wanted kind of like her blood bank person, and then Verity and Jean Chu, they end up falling in love. Now, I probably set my expectations a bit differently for this book because when it said female, my brain for some reason was like, oh, this will be like a romance. No, it was not. It was a very abusive vampire story between Jean Chu and Verity. Verity does a lot of things that would be considered SA, like throwing her down the stairs, drinking her blood, and then healing her, being like, oh, it's okay, I can fix you, I'll hurt you and abuse you, but I will heal you and it'll all be fine. And then we have another character, Po Lam, who has worked for Verity for quite some time, and Po Lam kind of like wants out. She doesn't work for this evil woman anymore. Po Lam and Jean Chu, they also kind of like develop a relationship, but it kind of felt shoehorned in there. And then there was also the side plot about this baby that they found, and then also all the vampires had this like society where like they had like the head vampire that could like control you. I didn't like it because the SA was beyond horrible. There was a whole page dedicated to trigger warnings for this book, and when you look at the trigger warnings for this book, please take that seriously because it is so correct. But also there was just like this fisting scene where Verity sticks her entire hand up Jean Chu's you-know-what and like is like ripping it apart, but then, you know, it just disgusted me. It grossed me out. I did not like it. But then the other thing that this book had going for it, or I guess working against it, is that at the end it was kind of like a choose your own adventure, choose who you want Jean Chu to end up with. So there's the Verity plotline, and then there's the Po Lam plotline that you could choose, and then there's also a third plotline where it's just like choose no one. And I just don't understand why the author did this, where it gave us the option to pick who we wanted Jean Chu to end up with, because it's like pick between the abuser or pick between this relationship with Po Lam that was barely developed in the book. It was not giving, it was not serving. This book was chosen for Sarah Without an H's and Riley Marie's Patreon book club pick, and what we did is that we did a whole like book bracket of like over 32 books. We all voted and we came down to this one book, and when I tell you most of the book club girlies did not like this book, so I don't feel alone in saying that this is a bad book and it's 1 star. And I feel so bad because this author hasn't had a lot of reviews on this book. I mean, the last time I checked, I think it was around like 5,000 reviews. I think this author is relatively new on the scene. I could be wrong on that, and I feel so bad giving a developing author a 1-star rating. So let's go ahead and recap all the books that I read for this canceled video. So I first read Diary of Blood, and I read that last year around Halloween time. I don't think I need to say any more on this book because the YouTube community knows about this book. They love it. I love it. I give 5 stars. I bought a special edition copy of this book. The writing was so beautiful. It was lyrical. It was poetic. And I know people will say this a lot and say that Diary of Blood was S.C. Gibbons' like attempt at writing differently, or kind of like this test project that somehow got to be released as like the first book that she's ever written. Because when you read A Diary of Blood and then you read An Education in Malice, the writing is just so different. So this theory or conspiracy theory has been going around the internet saying that An Education in Malice and Evocation, which was released recently, I think this year, were actually the first books that S.D. Gibson wrote, and then she wrote A Diary of Blood as kind of like a writing exercise to write a little bit more poetically and a bit different. And I guess that's why a lot of people have been like hating on An Education in Malice and Evocation. But let me tell you, I love A Diary of Blood, give it 5 stars. I read An Education in Malice, also gave it 5 stars. So I feel like I'm alone in this vessel of liking both of those books. And then I bet you if I read Evocation, which I think is available at my library right now, I would probably like that too. I think S.D. Gibson is just the author for me. And the next book I read was Midnight is the Darkest Hour. And I don't need to go into any more details about this book because I hated it. 1 star, 1 star. I think that was the book that I hated the most in 2023 when I read it, and I think that's why I scrapped this video to begin with, because I hated that book so much and I didn't want to put out a Halloween video that was just purely negative. But I was like, you know what, you guys like it when I roast books, so here we are to roast Midnight is the Darkest Hour, because the conspiracy theory for Ashley Winstead also holds for this one, where we think Midnight is the Darkest Hour is the first one that she wrote but was not released first. They released In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. I think she wrote later, but somehow that got published first. And because In My Dreams I Hold a Knife and The Last Housewife did so well, Ashley Vincent was like, well, I have this book that I already wrote and is ready to be released. Here you go. But that's just me. That is a conspiracy theory that I believe in and most of YouTube believes in. This is not something that I made up. I've heard it around a lot. I'm so sorry to Midnight is the Darkest Hour. I hate that book. Absolutely horrible. I know she's coming out with a book next year and I'll put it on the screen. I think it's something like This Book Will Bury You or something like that, and I want to read that book to just give Ashley Winston another chance. And the last book I read was The Wicked and the Willing, and like I said before, I was not wicked and I was not willing enough because I hated this book. 1 star! It just had an overwhelming amount of essay and abuse and I couldn't get past it, and so that was very fortunate. So anyways, I hope you like my Halloween video, and I also want to say for the first time on this channel that I have started a TikTok. It's simply Lexi Tries Reading. You can go and look that up on TikTok and follow me there. That TikTok is less to do about books and more about like life updates, more about videos on my dog. It's a bit more personal than I am here on my YouTube channel. So if you want more of me but more of my like life stuff, you can go ahead and follow me over there. I do still post some book related content on my TikTok, but for some reason TikTok is like, we don't want you to talk about books, we want you to talk about yourself. That's what y'all are getting. Anyway, if you like this video, please give it a like, please subscribe, and please comment below, and I will see you in another video next week. Bye!